Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's very timely and very important webinar, Examining the Impact of Racism and Social Injustice in Nursing Practice and Healthcare. My name is Katie Murphy, and I am the newly elected president of the Massachusetts Nurses Association, a professional organization and labor union that represents more than 23,000 frontline nurses and healthcare professionals here in the Commonwealth. This is the first major M&A event that I have had the privilege of introducing since starting my term in October. And I have to say, I can't think of another educational program that is more important right now than this one. I am honored to be a part of it, but I am also painfully aware that in the year 2020, we as a nation should be well past the need for holding such programs. That isn't the case, however. And the ugly events that have unfolded in this country since the horrifying murder of George Floyd in June, now too many to count, are absolute proof that racism and social inequity continue to threaten the lives of too many people in this country. In nursing, we bear firsthand witness to the health consequences of disparity. We see the social, economic, physical, and psychological violence that is perpetrated against people of color. And we see how they are socially devalued and systematically assaulted. The Massachusetts Nurses Association takes seriously its charge to be vocal advocates for the health and safety of the most vulnerable members within our communities, whether those communities are our neighborhoods, hospitals, or workplaces. Institutional racism and the systemic oppression of communities of color are both public health emergencies and pervasive obstacles in our work as healthcare providers and labor activists. It is our hope that today's program will shine a light on these festering spots that lurk within our professional culture, so that together we can build the just and equitable society that all people deserve. Now, before I introduce our keynote speaker, I do need to review a few important items with you. First, please note that there will not be an opportunity for any real-time question and answer sessions today. Instead, if you have a question, please see the sidebar chat area and use the posted link for the speaker question submission form. The speaker will direct your question to whom you direct your question will then respond as soon as possible. These links are going to come up slowly just because they're a little bit lengthy, so they will show up. Next, please note that the post-test and evaluation for this program must be completed by 5 p.m. on Friday, November 20th. Links to those items, both the test and evaluation tools, will also be posted in the chat area throughout the program, and they can also be cut and pasted as needed. In addition, these links will also be sent to you as part of a follow-up email that you'll receive within 24 hours at the end of the webinar. Now on to a few quick other formalities. Please note that this educational activity is provided by the Massachusetts Nurses Association, which is accredited as a provider of nursing continuing professional development by the American Nurses Credentialing Center's Commission on Accreditation. This program awards 2.25 contact hours based on our accreditor's contact hour value and 2.7 contact hours based on the contact hour value utilized by the Massachusetts Board of Registration in Nursing. The Bourne contact hour value may only be used for relicensure in Massachusetts. To successfully complete this program and receive contact hours, you must 1, sign in, 2, be present for the entire period of the session, 3, complete the post-test, and 4, complete and submit the program evaluation. At the end of the program, you will receive a verification of participation and successful completion certificate. In the event that you lose the certificate, please call or email the Division of Nursing at the M&A, and they will forward to you a release of information form that you will complete and send back to the M&A. Once the form is validated, your duplicate certificate will be mailed. The M&A anti-discrimination policy statement is unrestricted by consideration of nationality, race, creed, religion, lifestyle, color, sex, handicap, or age, and shall be to work for the improvement and availability of healthcare services for all people, foster high standards of nursing practice, education, research and nursing administration, promote the professional development of nurses, advance the economic and general welfare of nurses, and act and speak for nurses in Massachusetts. All continuing education activities must be free from bias. Therefore, all program planners, presenters, and content experts are required to disclose all financial relationships or lack thereof between themselves and commercial supporters of the activity and products addressed directly or indirectly therein. You will notice a question regarding disclosure of any conflict of interest on the evaluation tool. Our accreditors and we want to make sure that we disclose any conflicts to you. Our speaker has declared no conflict of interest. Other program planners and contact experts have also declared no conflict of interest. This program may not be photographed, videotaped, or audio taped. Out of respect to the speakers and other participants, all cell phones, pagers, and electronic devices must be silenced during the presentation. Lastly, all records are considered confidential. Information regarding participant attendance is not disclosed by the provider unit. Once records are no longer needed, the paper records are shredded. Records are maintained for 9 years. Files are accessible only to provider unit staff and divisions of nursing and health and safety staff. All requests for access must be processed through a provider unit member. This is at the point where I would be announcing and introducing our speaker, who has been delayed, unfortunately, and I'm not getting any information that he is here yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the program slightly out of order, and what we'll do is we'll turn this over to the first panel. But when our keynote speaker, Dr. Dyson, arrives, we will then shift from panel number 1 to hear our keynote speaker, Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. And I thank you very much for your flexibility and apologize for any inconvenience. And so that's saying, Samantha, take it away. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Samantha Joseph Erskine, and I am a proud registered nurse as well as an M&A board of members and co-chair of the M&A Diversity Committee. I will be introducing you to our first group of panelists, and thanking you for taking the time to join us today. You are such an oh God, I'm thanking Dr. Dyson, sorry guys. Our first panel today is entitled The Lived Experience, which will provide us with an opportunity to hear directly from 4 of our fellow nurses about how racism and social injustice have affected them in their workplaces and beyond. Our first panelist is Charlene Hollins. Charlene has been a nurse for 11 years in Boston. Currently, she is an RN in one of the city's emergency departments, while also working as an adjunct nursing faculty professor. She's a member of the Emergency Nurses Association, the American Nurses of Nurse Practitioners, and the National Black Nurses Association. As a healthcare professional, her interest lies in defining and determining the healthcare needs of her community and continuing to bridge the gap of healthcare disparities. Next, Candice Jones. Candice has had various clinical nursing positions throughout her career. Sorry. She's currently working towards her master's with a focus on global public health. She's also a member of the Emergency Department Health Equity Committee for her employer. She has over 20 years of professional nursing experience and is also been contributing author on curriculum for the racial justice and M&A proposed curriculum. Thirdly, Judith Laguerre. Judith has over 25 years of clinical nursing experience and is currently working with the adult and geriatric population as a case manager and direct care provider. She is committed to volunteerism and was a founding member of a medical humanitarian group in Haiti, is a board member of the Haiti Community Foundation, and participates in the annual Schwartz Center's Compassion Care event. Judith has also presented professionally multiple times on the topic of pressure ulcer Prevention, and is the co-chair of the MNA's Diversity Committee. Shannon Niles. Shannon has experience in multiple clinical areas, including medical surgical, telemetry, emergency, geriatric psychiatry as a float nurse. Recently, she has transitioned to working in critical care. Her certifications include BLS, ACLS, and PALS. And lastly, Dr. Joanne Ferguson. Today's moderator is the director of the Division of Membership at the MNE. In addition to her role as director, she teaches continuing education courses on dispute resolution for existing MNE staff nurses and healthcare professionals. Lectures senior nursing students in several nursing programs, providing guidance in the transition from the classroom to the work environment, and functions as a mediator for disputes among staff and between staff and their employers. Dr. Fergus also serves as an adjunct professor at Emmanuel College, where she teaches health policy with specific attention to the care of urban and undeserved populations. Ladies, good morning, and thanks for joining us. Joanne, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Samantha. First of all, I want to acknowledge and thank the panelists for dedicating their time and acknowledge how difficult these conversations can be, especially in the environment that we're in today. I want to respect your bravery and your and making yourselves vulnerable for us in this discussion, and recognizing that these discussions can sometimes come with backlash for the individuals engaged, and so want to acknowledge that. We also want to acknowledge that when we talk about racism, we're not simply talking about Black and white issues. Although the panelists today represent Black women, we understand that we're talking about multiple peoples of color. And so we want to acknowledge that we understand that our panel doesn't fully represent the full scope of individuals that we're talking about when we talk about racism. So moving on to our panelists in the time that we have together, we know that we're not going to cover all our bases, but putting out our first question, given the current climate that we're in right now with the revelations or the heightened revelations of health disparities and in individuals of color, as well as the heightened awareness of issues of systemic racism within our healthcare industry, what does it feel like to you all as women of color working in the current environment? And so I'll call on Samantha first. I'm sorry, I'll call on Judith first.
Thank you, Joanne. It was a double whammy for me. First of all, to deal with all the chaos of this terrible disease, but also seeing so many Black and brown people being affected, seeing this disparity in this light. It was so painful, so traumatic, so demoralizing. I could say shameful to see this in that light. Race matter. And as a society, I think we need to understand and acknowledge the impact of racism on people. I was happy yesterday to read the Attorney General report that they call racism as a determinant of health. And as nurses, we have the responsibility to stand for our patients, to advocate for them, to fight for their best interests so we can have a positive outcome. But as a minority nurse, how can I do that? How can I advocate? Because I have my own things to deal with, the injustice, the bias. I am disempowered, sometimes voiceless. How can I raise my voice for a patient? So I think we need to build coalition. We need to build allies to help fight this and do better to our patients and to our ourselves, nurses and patients. So we decrease that disparity, that inequality in healthcare.
I'm apologizing to the entire panel. I just got a message that our keynote speaker is on. And so we're gonna cut away from our panel to allow our keynote speaker to get in and try to work with Judith and her sound as well. So I'm gonna ask you all to put yourselves on mute so that we can allow our keynote speaker to enter.
That felt like a very poignant time to cut away, but I am eager to introduce Dr. Dyson to the webinar. And it really is with great honor and excitement that I introduce you to today's keynote speaker, Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. Dr. Dyson is a professor of sociology at Georgetown University, I think at the moment. He is also an author, a contributing opinion writer at the New York Times, an MSNBC political analyst, a contributing editor at the New Republic, the host of the Michael Eric Dyson podcast featuring Dr. Dan Ratner, and an ordained Baptist minister for over 30 years. Dr. Dyson has authored nearly 20 books on subjects such as the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, NASA's debut album, Illmatic, Tupac, Marvin Gaye, Jay-Z, and Hurricane Katrina's devastating and long-lasting effects. He has won 2 NAACP Image Awards for outstanding literary work in nonfiction and the American Book Award in 2007 for Come Hell or High Water, Hurricane Katrina and the Color of Disaster. Essence named Dr. Dyson one of the 40 most inspiring African Americans, and Ebony listed him among the 100 most influential Black Americans. He often speaks at universities and political conventions, but he is also known for his speaking engagements at union halls, prisons, classrooms, and churches. Throughout his career, Dr. Dyson has had a profound effect on American culture and thinking. His book, What Truth Sounds Like, continues the conversation started in his 2017 bestseller, Tears We Cannot Stop, and was the winner of the 2018 Southern Books Prize for Nonfiction. We are so very lucky to have him with us here today. Welcome, Dr. Dyson, to today's webinar, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much for that gracious introduction. Can you all hear me? Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, all right. All right, very good. What an honor it is to be here today and to have this wonderful opportunity. I was disappointed in the panel stopping because I was enjoying the forthright, frank conversation, the open dialogue, and the ability to address critical social issues and crucial social justice issues in our own time. So I just want to simply add my voice to the colloquy of voices that have been expressing these ideas and to speak openly and honestly about this situation we discover ourselves in. I want to thank not only Ms. Murphy, Dr. Judy, and her daughter, Sister Lisa, for our connection, and for all of you who are gathered here today. The great Southern historian C. Vann Woodward said that a title is a contract between an author and her or his audience. And if that is true, it is especially and acutely and equally true that a title is a contract between a speaker and his or her audience. So if I were to talk about something today, if I were to frame my conversation around a title, it would be the United States of Amnesia. The United States of Amnesia. That term is not mine originally, but pinched, borrowed, sampled from the late writer Gore Vidal, who talked about us living in the United States of Amnesia. I would add to his appellation there that Barbra Streisand sings the theme song of the United States of Amnesia. Now, a lot of you young people don't even know who Barbra Streisand is. Shame on you. I know you know Taylor Swift, that's great, Katy Perry, and of course the great Beyonce. But Barbra Streisand, I'm sure that in a nursing Association in Massachusetts, we have women, men, and others who are quite familiar with Miss Streisand's Corpus, one of the most famous songs she sang by a songwriting team is the song Memories. It was Gladys Knight and who remade the song as well. What's too painful to remember, we simply choose to forget. What's too painful to remember, we simply choose to forget. Race in America has been an enormous pain. Some have called it America's original sin. Others have said it is integrated into the very fabric of the nation. The great philosopher Beyonce Giselle Knowles said that some have said that racism is so American that when we challenge racism, it looks as if we are challenging America. That is because America's coexistence with racial dominance, racial terror, racial tyranny has been a thing that we have rarely acknowledged in the mainstream, and yet it continues to be true. The wonderful opportunities that the nation presents, the extraordinary diversities it showcases, the incredible opportunities that are available, the quest for truth, justice, democracy, freedom, have characterized this nation at its best, at its height and at its apex, at its beautiful summit, have met, have kissed, have embraced notions of justice and notions of democracy. And yet at its worst, America has bitterly divided and divorced these two truths. At its worst, America has failed to live up to the true meaning of its creed, as Dr. King declared in 1963 in Birmingham, in Washington, D.C., in his famous I Have a Dream speech. And so, my friends, we are dealing with the bitter divorce of justice and democracy, the bitter divorce of American ways of life that are rooted in equality and American ways of life that are rooted in inequality. When we come to the ideal of America, it is fueled by a set of ideas that all human beings should be unencumbered in their pursuit of justice and democracy, the pursuit of happiness, the pursuit of the ability to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with one's fellow citizen, and by dint of reason and by dint of skill and by dint of great and virtuous character, to be able to pursue the possibility that we will all be able, as American citizens, to justly and equally exist in a nation that recognizes our fundamental humanity with decency and respect. And yet, my brothers and sisters, this has not always been the case. From the very beginning of the founding of this nation, enslavement was rooted into the heart of the matter. And as a result of that, the beginning of America was also the continuation of something older than the nation itself. The bitter acrimony about racial difference, the refusal to tolerate racial difference, the insistence that there would be a hierarchy, that white would be at the top, and those who are indigenous, those who are native, those who are Black, those who are Latinx, those who are women, those who are not men, those who are outside the arc of white masculine identity. This is not an attack on white men. This is an acknowledgement of history. And acknowledging history means that we have to deal, as one of your panelists just said, with some uncomfortable truths that will benefit all of us. But you all work in a field where uncomfortable truth is the necessary predicate for health and healing. A doctor can't come into the room and say, look, your cholesterol makes no difference. The triglycerides make no difference. Your latissimus dorsi is injured. Your gluteus maximus needs to be reduced, Lord. And there are particular problems in the bloodstream. We're looking for a vaccine right now. We're seeing with Moderna and others that it's what, 94.5% safe, no side effects, because all drugs, no difficult, unrecoverable side effects. We know all drugs bring side effects. So if we lie to people, oh no, you're fine. You don't have to change your lifestyle. You don't have to change your diet. You don't have to change your habits. You don't have to stop inhaling air that is deleterious and destructive. So you are dealing with uncomfortable truths. Uncomfortable truths are the necessity of a field of medicine that seeks to make well the bodies it is able to address, the human beings who occupy those bodies, seeing a holistic approach, right? We've discovered that the psychological stresses of life have a psychoneurochemical effect, have a deleterious impact on the physiological structures of human beings. The physiognomy is buffeted by the stresses of life. And so we began to see the psychosomatic impulse and impact of trauma and stress, and enduring high rates of stress may elevate your blood pressure, may cause diabetes, may incur health problems like heart disease. So uncomfortable truth is the coin of the realm. And yet when it comes to the health of America, when it comes to the spiritual and moral and psychological and racial health of America, we have tended to lie to ourselves. Or, as Barbara Streisand said, what's too painful to remember, we simply choose to forget. So like an ostrich, although we know this doesn't literally happen, but the metaphor sticks, sticking its head into the sand, we refuse to acknowledge what is around us. And so, my brothers and sisters, my friends, what we must do then is acknowledge that from the very beginning of this nation, even before the beginning of the nation, the pre-existing condition of racial disharmony, the pre-existing condition of racial bigotry, the pre-existing condition of racial tolerance, the pre-existing condition of anti-Blackness, the pre-existing condition of anti-Indigenous feeling, the pre-existing condition of anti-Native people's beliefs, the pre-existing condition of misogyny and patriarchy and sexism, the pre-existing condition of being hostile to any norm, practice, belief, or behavior that fell outside of the circumference of what the dominant culture believed was normal. And now, as one of your panelists has already indicated, even though we will not deal with all of the differences, though we know they matter, the Black-white divide is not the only racial difference in America. We know that we have Asian brothers and sisters from the Pacific Rim, or Southeast Asia, or across the great divide between the so-called Pacific and the Atlantic. When we look at African peoples as well, when we look at indigenous folk across the globe, when we look at the divides in this country between Latinx and dominant cultures, or Latinx and even cultures of other colors, we know that it is a blur, a jumble. There are multiple forms of difference that we have to, grapple with. But at the same time, the Black-white divide has been the major artery through which the blood of bigotry has flowed through the body politic of America from the very beginning. And even in Latinx communities and cultures, lighter, brighter, and whiter seems to be seen as superior, more beautiful, and browner and darker seems to be inferior and more stigmatized. So even though we don't deal with all of the racial differences that we could, but we must, we see that color plays a role in all communities, even when there is no specific acknowledgement of racial difference. So that if you go to Salvador de Bahia or Santiago de Cuba, and they say in those communities, in Cuba and in Brazil, we have no racial problem like you folk in America, in North America, in the United States of America. Well, why are all the light-skinned people up front at the counters on the catways, catwalks, and in the positions of authority and visible power, and the darker people seem to be disappeared. So from the very beginning, the pre-existing conditions of racial intolerance and bigotry prevailed in this nation. Enslavement was a truth, was a reality. And with the 1619 Project of the New York Times suggesting that in 1619, 20 souls were extracted from their resting place in the soil of Africa, their native homeland, their native haunts, and forcibly extracted from that homeland, and brought here to Jamestown, where the official beginning of enslavement in our culture is marked. 1619 is now totemic, symbolic, an avatar of the racial bigotry and tyranny that has characterized American society from the very beginning. And so from the very beginning, this has been a reality, but look at the brouhaha occasioned even by the New York Times's insistence that 1619 would play a critical role in the burgeoning consciousness of a newly found racial reckoning where America would have to grapple with racial intolerance, racial tyranny, and racial difference. And so, my brothers and sisters, yes, America is addicted to amnesia, because to remember the enslavement of human beings for 240 some odd years, and then after that enslavement in Reconstruction, where there seemed to be a repudiation of that racist and slave past, and yet very quickly those gains were snatched away, those political benefits were denied, the advantages that would accrue to certain African people in America were immediately put down, and the rise of Jim Crow came about, so that the plantation was displaced by the fields that Black people worked as part of the newfound enslavement in America, where they were working plantations freely, getting a wage, and yet in Jim Crow America, we know that sharecropping was another word for that continued prospect of racial inequity. Why is all that important? Because history is important. If we are to move from the United States of amnesia and claim our citizenship in the kingdom of memory, we must acknowledge those uncomfortable truths that characterize the medical profession, that characterize what we do as citizens of the United States of America. So politics and medicine do have an interrelationship there. And so when we deal with those unsavory truths, when we contend with things we would rather sweep away, we can become a better nation if we acknowledge that that history is critical, is crucial to defining us as a nation. Isn't it interesting? We are addicted to history when it comes to Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln and George Washington, the founding fathers, the founding brothers, the founding sisters, the founding mothers. But when it comes to the founding brothers, okay, I have to throw that in, and the founding sisters, it's a different story. Yes to Abigail Van Buren and Abigail Adams, no to Michelle Obama, until quite recently, when we changed the game up. Yes, embracing white men of genius. No to Black men of genius, Frederick Douglass, Benjamin Banneker, later Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois. Yes, they rose to the top. Yes, because they were the cream of the cream. They insisted on self-expression and creating space, but it was against the odds. It was against barriers and impediments and obstacles that prevented the flourishing of those human beings of color. So when we talk about, on the one hand, the obsession with American history, it's history that flatters us. It's history that tells us we're great, and we are. It's history that says this nation is relatively unique, though not exclusively unique. No, American exceptionalism. We are the greatest and best nation, and nobody else seems to measure up to what we do. There are many other great nations in the world. God didn't make just one great nation. God didn't make just one great people. God didn't make just one great gender. God didn't make just one great sexual orientation. There are a number of nations and peoples and tribes and communities and histories and trajectories and moral orientations and ethical insights that need to be taken seriously. And a number of traditions must be accepted. And African American in particular, Black more broadly, the racial difference must be seen as critical to the nature of American destiny and identity. Thus, we reject our citizenship in the United States of amnesia, claim our citizenship in the kingdom of memory, and we embrace the beauty, the edifying elegance of Black identity. We embrace the extraordinary possibility that this nation will be best when we embrace all of our brothers and sisters, all fellow citizens. And this is why the racial reckoning that is upon us now is so critical. But if we acknowledge that from the very beginning, there were pre-existing conditions of racial intolerance, bigotry, and nativism that precluded the flourishing of many people of color, if we acknowledge that at the beginning of this nation's history, already enslavement was a thing, a fact of our common existence together that denied systemically opportunities to other peoples, especially Black people and people of color, if we acknowledge that the perpetuation of that legacy of inequality continues to this day systemically, even if individual prejudices have been dealt with and addressed, anything that ends in system has the potential to spread racial inequality without the consent of the participants involved. Racial justice system, public school system, healthcare system. Yes, even the beloved healthcare system of America, and we know there's a huge difference between the appreciation for medicine and the political structures that accommodate healthcare in America and the attempts organizationally to articulate a norm of the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm, and yet so much harm is done to people. Look at the racial inequities even in the medical profession. Think about it. Even when you control for class, a Black person and a white person going to see a physician about, say, heart disease are treated differentially. They've done a number of studies, empirical verification. I know science ain't real popular among some populations in America. Hopefully in January, that will change significantly, hopefully even before then, as we talk about masking up, as we talk about COVID-19. This ain't no figment of some crazy imagination. This is an empirically verifiable virus that has a global pandemic at hand. And so when we control for even class, Black and white people receive different therapies, some more aggressive than others, when it comes to stuff like heart disease. And I'm sure many of you took note of a study that came out about a month ago that said that Black infants have a better chance of survival if they are treated by Black physicians. Now, slow down. We ain't saying that non-Black physicians are racist and have the desire to hurt Black babies. But what it does say is that systemically, the disregard for Black life, the failure to understand that all Black lives matter, that Black lives matter, suggests that Black physicians may pay attention more acutely, more sensitively to issues that might prevent the healthy coming to maturity of those infants, might prod them, urge them to take extra special care, to pay attention in ways that physicians should to infants, to go the extra mile, to make certain that every measure has been exhausted, to make certain that everything has been done to secure the fundamental health of that growing infant. And so we know that systemic inequities, systemic bigotry, prejudice, and racism exist in a culture alongside undeniable progress, alongside undeniable embrace of people of color across a number of axes of ethnicity and color. And yet at the same time, those systemic problems are real. What George Floyd revealed on May 25th of this year, what his death revealed, is that despite the enormous progress we have made, there is the lethal persistence of racial difference that has to be addressed. There have been white men on film, on video, who have pursued a police person with a machete in hand, and the police people ran from them because they didn't want to harm an American citizen. Can we get the same? Right? We're not asking for merely a structural transformation, a radical reorganization of the logic of American life where a Black life matters. Yes, we want that. But it is manifest in simple gestures. When the police stop you for a traffic signal that you've disobeyed, or for a signal on your car that doesn't work, do you expect, like Walter Scott, to be killed in South Carolina? Now, he ran from the police because he had an outstanding warrant for, he hadn't paid child support. And of course, that's wrong, yes. But is it right to shoot him in his back 8 times? 7 of the bullets, I think, hitting him? And then throw down your taser as a police person, not even knowing what the particular problem with this young Black man is. And yet you feel capable of doing that and then saying that you felt your life was in danger. And had there not been a tape, a video recording, a digital record of your malfeasance, you may as well have gotten away with murder. And so the trauma to the body politic, the trauma to Black life, the exigent and urgent demand, urgent care, the triage that is upon us says that a lot of people are suffering, but the most suffering has to be acknowledged. And the greatest degree of suffering is to those vulnerable citizens who, through no design of their own, born as Black in America, and not just here. We know that Trevor Noah has a book called Born a Crime. If you're the product of an interracial relationship at a certain time in South Africa where it was against the law. The former president of the United States of America was essentially born a crime as well. And so how is it that we can acknowledge in this kind of racial triage to which we pay strict attention that the hurting elements of our community, Black and other peoples, Latinx, Indigenous, BIPOC as we now call them, Black, Indigenous, people of color, whatever term you deploy, most vulnerable to practices that with white Americans don't end in death. The other day, there was a video of a cop trying to arrest a white citizen. The white citizen got the best of him. And the cop with a gun on his hip ran while the young man got into the police car to take off. That's inconceivable when it comes to Black or Latinx people. Now, I'm not suggesting that we have affirmative action for thugs, for people who do dastardly deeds or at least misbehave. My point is, can we get human recognition that these are not people to be judged and tried on a street and shot and killed and murdered, that they should be treated with the same equanimity, the same poise, the same grace, the same recognition of fellow citizenship and humanity that many white people who misbehave are. And in fact, white people who misbehave get a fairer shake than Black people who don't. What George Floyd revealed to us, and that affected so many white brothers and sisters, is that for the first time, many white folk could see, my God, what Black people have said is true. We have been living in the United States of amnesia, and what's too painful for us to remember, we choose to forget, because George Floyd wasn't first. Neither was Eric Garner, but we saw him first on film. What, 6, 7 years before? I can't breathe, he said. What's too painful to remember, we simply choose to forget. In Staten Island, taken down by police people, Officer Pantaleo then puts a chokehold on him that is ruled illegal, and yet still applied to Mr. Garner, and ultimately no one held to account for the death of an innocent Black man. An unarmed Black man too, though we know white people who are armed, who go to state houses to protest a lockdown for health care reasons. It must seem idiotic to those of you, whether you're Democratic or Republican, whether you're left or right, whether you're radical leftists or radical right-wingers. It just appears, according to the medicine of the case, wear a damn mask, dress up like Halloween, pretend you're robbing somebody in a John Wayne movie, but put on a damn mask. But Paul Laurence Dunbar, the great Black poet, said, we wear the mask. There is a mask we cannot take off because we have been wearing it from the very beginning, and it has marked us in the same way that some white brothers and sisters are so angry with people for wearing masks. We have been assaulted because of the mask we wear. And so what George Floyd showed to many white brothers and sisters is that the United States of amnesia must come to an end. Many of them felt for the first time, my God, Black people are not making this up. We're looking for our own with our own eyes. And why could people see it? Well, most of us who could afford to be, were at home. The pandemic's near ubiquity and prevalence in terms of its consequences, forcing us to stay home. Many people on the front line couldn't stay home. Many of you couldn't stay home because you are noble servants and courageous advocates for the health of our citizens, your fellow citizens. You're on the front line. People who were forced to carry food to those who needed it on the front line. Many poor Black and brown folk who couldn't help but be on the front line were out there exposed. And the shifting sands of politics were obscuring the clear medical message being sent by the CDC. Why should that be politicized? Why should that be a political issue? Why should truth be hostage to ideology? And yet, because many of us were at home, watching our screens, looking for the latest update from Katie Murphy as MNA president, you're so loyal. Wonderful people you are. We were looking at our screens, and when the George Floyd video darkened the horizon of our digital devices, we were horrified. And many white people said, this is not right. And I keep saying white brothers and sisters because Black and Latinx and other people of color already understood what the deal was. But for many white brothers and sisters who were skeptical, you must have done something. You must have cursed them out. You must have hit them. But we see that when white folk curse them out and hit them, they go home alive. But nothing like that occurred. And here this man laying prostrate on the ground, 6'6", you couldn't take full measure of his impressive height, and yet reduced to persona non grata, as the knee of a police officer then dug into his neck, and his mortally depressed column ultimately asphyxiated him. No nurse coming to his aid. No physician intervening. Calling for his mother, crying for relief, begging the officers, still calling them sir. while Chauvin's knee is on his neck, while King's knee is on his back, while Lane's knee is on his legs, and while Officer Tao is lookout. That was diversity without equity. 2 white officers, a black one, and an Asian one, came together to commit mayhem. Diversity shorn of ethics, diversity shorn of equity, diversity deprived of an overarching vision of true justice is nothing but integrating, as James Baldwin said, a burning house. Why do you want to integrate into a burning house? Put the fire out so that we can all enjoy justice together. So that fateful day in this year, May 25th, the weekend of a holiday, when we saw Mr. Floyd lose his life, and the same day, of course, in New York City, Miss Amy Cooper being asked by Christian Cooper, a graduate from a school up your way, I can't remember it, it's in Cambridge somewhere. It's an all right school, you know. I went to a school in New Jersey called Princeton, you know, that was a good school. All right. But that school in Cambridge, I think it's Howard University. I'll think of the name later. This graduate of that Ivy League school, arguably with the greatest reputation in the West. I mean, Cambridge and Oxford would argue, more ancient citadels of learning. But that school in Cambridge, Massachusetts, arguably the greatest brand for brilliance, enlightenment and intelligence, reason and rationality in the world, certainly in this nation. He was a graduate of that school, a bird watcher, an ornithologist, right? Ornithology was his pastime. And as an amateur ornithologist and as a person who was looking at the natural habitats, the birds about whom he nurtured curiosity, asking the woman to leash her dog, flipping the table, because usually white folk telling black folk and brown folk and others what to do because they feel that they are officially deputized by law, though they're just American citizens like everybody else. But he flipped it. How dare he remove from her the presumption of a superiority by asking her to leash her dog. So this time, Karen was played by Keith. Work with me, people. I'm doing the best I can. Right? And so Amy Cooper did what many Karens, and excuse me for those who are named Karen, you know I love all y'all. Love you, Karen. As an avatar of presumptuousness by many white women in America who feel that it is their sworn duty to call the police on black people doing what everybody be doing when they're doing natural things. Drinking lemonade as kids, police call. Selling it, selling water, police call. And can you imagine the most egregious offense, an un-American thing, when black people are out barbecuing in Oakland, California, calling the police? What is more American than trying to separate black people from their barbecue? What in the world? I know you as nurses say, look, reduce the salt content, the sodium intake, be careful about the consumption of pork, and moderate. Okay, we got it. We just want some barbecue sauce on something, some tofu. And so that same day, Amy Cooper lied and said that Christian Cooper was attacking her because she knew that the floating signifier of black masculinity and its dangers would play well with a police call. And what we didn't find out until a few days ago was that she placed a second call to say that he had assaulted her. And she still ain't in jail. And I don't believe she should be, but my God, can we get black and brown and people of color out of jail? I want my child to have a better education. Okay, so let me just lie about what the address is. so they can go to a better school. 5 years in jail. Oh, let me be a Hollywood superstar and lie about the sport my kid plays. Pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for you to take an SAT test to get them in. 2 months. This is systemic racism, friends. Amy Cooper lies, Karen, deputized by a culture where whiteness is seen as superior and unassailable, and blackness, not an impregnable force, but a force that can be permeated. And so what we learned by George Floyd's death is that Black people have been telling the truth. Not that Black people don't lie. We don't say believe Black people. That's a horrible, right, for any group. You don't believe all of anybody. You believe what the truth tells you. You believe what the facts say. You believe what the evidence suggests. And the evidence has suggested Black people die at disproportionate rates more than anybody for no good reason, for reasons that don't get white people sent to the morgue. And so what we saw, we were all home. White people hit the streets in terms of social protests. The greatest movement for social justice in America happened this year. The greatest protests, the greatest amount of protests, the greatest number of people participating, because white people got involved and put their bodies on the front line and said enough is enough. Even though we know racial intolerance persists, we see it at the highest levels of the land. We see the highest echelons of politics unleashing white supremacy, white nationalism, proud boys, proud to be proud boys in America. And so the reckoning with racial intolerance, racial bigotry is not simply a personal and individual bigotry that must be extirpated, eviscerated, removed, and gotten rid of, but it's the systems of inequality that perpetuate legacies that need to be addressed, of injustice that need to be removed. Kids getting kicked out of school earlier and earlier, 7 and 8 years old, who are Black and brown and indigenous. White kids, snap on the back of the hand. The police in our inner city schools, those kids get put into detention. Detention feeds them into jail. Jail is a warehouse for prison. The school to prison pipeline has been documented systemically, not just individually. You might like your favorite Black person, your favorite Latinx person. You might have a couple of friends you like who are part of another race. That ain't the resolution to the issue. I'm glad for you and proud of you. But my Lord, the systemic inequity has to be addressed. The reckoning in America has to be real. Black people can't keep dying at the hands of police. Hands up, get shot. Hands down, get shot. Tell the police like Philando Castile in Minneapolis, I have a legally registered gun. Just want you to know. 7 seconds later, he's being shot. Rapid fire by a cop, because the real crime is Philando Castile's pigment and the perceptions associated with that pigment. And his girlfriend live streams his death on Facebook as her daughter in the back seat witnesses the trauma. We can't keep doing that, friends. And the price of acceptance can't be, well, you know, you Black people, if you didn't commit the crime, you wouldn't be out there being subject to it. When we see so many white people doing crime and drudgery who never get subject to that. And so systemic racism is now on the docket, to shift metaphors from medicine to the legal field. And what will we do? Or to switch it back to medicine, It's on the day's surgical procedures, what we're going to do, how we're going to handle it. What scrubs will we adopt? What scalpel will we deploy? What new laser will we use? What new medical neologism will we employ for an unknown etiology as we discern the mechanisms of mystery that cohabitate with the medical marvels and miracles we sometimes deliver and our vehicles for? And what we do depends on what we see. If you live in the United States of amnesia, you will deny what's before your face. The empirical verification of racial hegemony, tolerance, terror, indifference to Black and brown and red and yellow peoples. But if you are a member of the kingdom of memory, where now we acknowledge George Floyd's death was not an anomaly, but an extension of racial tyranny. From the beginning of the nation, pre-existing conditions of racial intolerance and racial hate and anti-Blackness, let's address it. Become better allies. Think, see, talk, do. If you see something, say something. If you know it's unjust, speak up. If you recognize in your system of healthcare what's not right, most Black and brown people use healthcare as they use the emergency ward as healthcare maintenance. As we argue about who has access to healthcare, you all on the front line, you know. And by the time you go to the emergency ward, the disease is further along than it could have been otherwise remedied earlier had you had competent and efficient medical intervention. Healthcare, preventive maintenance, watch your blood sugar, watch your intake of, certain liquids. Look at what happens when you eat certain foods. You're living in food deserts, as they call it. Food insecure, that means you ain't got none. You'd be insecure too. We can't even deal without toilet paper. My God, what we gonna do without basic nutrients in this pandemic? And so the reality is that we have to acknowledge that. Be better allies, acknowledge that we're living with a dual pandemic, COVID-19 and COVID-16-19. And both of them have a strange cry that unites them. I can't breathe. Spongy lungs invaded by a virus we still don't understand, whose etiology we have tried to connect some partisan politics to China, right? Remember, they blame Latinx people for the swine flu. They're always looking for scapegoats. In origins, what are we going to talk about? The origin of white supremacy? Are we going to call that a virus? Are we going to name the people who do it? What about if we consistently and constantly reminded white brothers and sisters by attaching their particular racial origin to a particular malady that has persisted for thousands of years? And so, being better allies, rejecting our citizenship in the United States of amnesia, and then confronting the dual pandemics that we are confronting now. They called them in the 90s syndemics. The integration of one pandemic on the one side and another pandemic on the other. This is a syndemic we're seeing. And in both instances, Black and brown bodies are more vulnerable. Now, some people say, you Black people and brown people, why don't you eat better? Do we have to go there? People would eat better if they had better food. You got high sugar content cereal stocked in ghetto stores when they can find them, whereas Whole Foods, which costs less than what you're doing in the hood, less to your body, less to your system, and sometimes less to your pocketbook. Stocking all the newest stuff, the cardboard tasting stuff. That's good for you. So when we talk about having access, the lack of access to healthcare itself is a symptom of a systemic disorder that has to be addressed. And in the dual pandemics, we have to see it as a system. The virus doesn't look at certain individuals. Hey, I don't like you. I'm going to have to attack you today. The virus is indifferent to all of that. And yet it has a disproportionate impact upon those who are more vulnerable as a result of pre-existing racial conditions that render their bodies more likely to die from this particular dis-ease. And so perhaps as we end, you, my brothers and sisters, rejecting your citizenship in the United States of amnesia, becoming better allies, understanding this dual pandemic that we confront, and then recognizing that it's systemic and not merely individual, can go a long way to addressing the inequities we see and making America greater than it is now, because we are more determined to leverage the medical knowledge, the insight, the understanding that you have to the betterment of the nation in which we live, the people you serve, and your fellow nurses and medical professionals whose nobility will ultimately help save us all. Thank you so very kindly for your time.
Before we rejoin our panelists from panel one, I would first like to say, offer my thanks to you, Dr. Dyson. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. You're an inspiration. Your participation here is important and will improve what we're trying to do here. And hopefully your conversation with us will open the eyes of many as to what we as Black people and people of color are facing on a daily basis, because a lot of the things you said are part of my life right now. And I thank you so much, so much. It was an honor to have you here. Once again, thank you.
Thank you so very much for this opportunity.
So to members of our panel one, if you could join us right now by video, we will go to our panelists. Sorry. Once again, we have, I'm not going to go into full details, just introduce everybody again, since we already did that. We have Charlene Hollins, Candice Jones, sorry, Judith Laguerre, Shannon Niles, and our very own Dr. Joanne Fergus. Welcome back, guys.
Thank you, everybody, and welcome back. It was a lot. It was a lot to take in, and it's very filling. So we started with a question, and again, reiterating, acknowledging that we're a panel of Black women speaking on racism, but acknowledging that we do not encompass the totality of what that means. I'm gonna move to the next question that sort of encapsulates some of that conversation. So all of you on the panel are women of color. But having said that, you're women of color that come from different cultures. Some of you are US born, and some of you are immigrants. And so I would ask, how does coming from a different culture inform your experience, and how do those cultures and heritage shape your experience as nurses in terms of racism in the workplace? And so I'll start with Shannon.
So I am a US born, but my parents did immigrate from Barbados in the 70s, which was a tough time here in the US. But I think my cultural background allows me to identify with some of my patients in the workplace and culturally with my colleagues. I deal with them in a more tender way, in a more respectful way. Back to my patients, I feel, some of my colleagues don't understand their cultural approach to medicine sometimes. which my experiences allow me to. Some people who immigrate here, you know, they bring their parents back here with them from their home country, and when they end up in the hospital, it's a tough thing because they more than often don't have insurance, and they're here for 6 months, and then they go back home for 6 months because they're not citizens here. So I've experienced that often in the workplace, and you know, my colleagues don't understand it because they ask what are the costs of things? How much is this going to cost me? So I think that allows me a lot more understanding on how to gauge their care.
Thanks, Shannon. How about you, Charlene?
Hello, everyone. I'm actually from America. So I'm here and my family is from Mississippi and Louisiana. So we are Southern born Black Americans. And my grandfather was right into the trenches of, you know, Emmett Till and all the hangings that have happened, all the slavery, cotton picking, all that. So for me, when I'm in the medical field and I'm in the trenches with my patients, I can relate to them as a woman of color. They're able to talk to me. We're able to, you know, they feel more relaxed. So they're able to tell me their medical care in a language that we speak to each other. It's in a relaxed language. And also being able to be bilingual and being able to speak a different language is also helpful when talking to our patients that come from a Black and Brown community, especially working in the emergency department when they come in, and you'll be able to relate to them again. And that conversation is just great inside of the medical field, so that way that we can get every information that we need when we are triaging our patients.
Thank you. How about you, Candace?
Hello, good afternoon. I think I'm US born also. I do have some Southern roots as well. I think the benefit is being that my culture has shaped being able to assimilate with my culture, and benefit is being able to go in the room feeling relaxed and bringing that sense of ease with patients with my background. I think by being a Black nurse, I find that sometimes I do have to watch my language sometimes with my colleagues, because it could be misconstrued sometimes as my verbiage or tone gets taken out of context sometimes, which is not meant that way. As Black women, we could come off being sometimes too assertive or aggressive, and that's not how it's perceived, which is a misconception. It's like we're held to a different standard sometimes, which is not the case. And sometimes my passion and my authenticity gets misconstrued. But I think in the rooms with the patients, that's my benefit, and that I can go in the room and work very well with patients from my background. So that's been my experience.
Thank you, Candace. How about you, Judith?
I was raised until the age of 21 in a society, a culture that incessantly taught me and reminded me the prowess of my ancestors, my forefathers, who were revolutionaries, freedom fighters, self-liberators, heroes, who stood up to their oppressors and tyrants to proclaim themselves free of the bondage of slavery. That was the only successful slave revolution in the world, and that is the Haitian Revolution. That did not only uplift the Haitian people, but the whole Black race. Armed with this, it gives me the courage to assert myself. You know, by knowing my history, it gives me equilibrium. It gives me confidence not to internalize the humiliation and the microaggression that I have to endure every day. And sometimes it gives me a little courage to micro resist by asking and sometimes demanding to value my dignity and my self-worth. But it helped me also by sharing that story with my coworker or my workplace altogether, because it's a great story, and it teach people about, story of Black people who rose from slavery and became free. And there is no parallel in the world. So that helped me. That gives me confidence and equilibrium that I should not internalize. Um, I know myself. I know my history. I know my place in the world.
Thank you, Judy. All of you are nurses who have excelled in your field and in some way transcended. One of the conversations that we tend to have, and we've had as getting to know you all, this sense of being the only one and what that means to be the only one in a space. And so part of the conversations that we've had in the past are concerns about how difficult it is for people of color, nurses of color, to move into different spaces where we're not traditionally seen in specialty areas or in the emergency room or as leaders, charge nurses, administrators, because there's sort of the system types us into a place and it's difficult to transcend the expectations of that type. But you all have moved into some of those spaces. And I'd like you all to sort of have a conversation or be able to share with us what it means for you if you've been the only one, or how did you become the only one? And so the only person of color in your space, or the first person of color in your space. And so I'll start with Candace.
Being the one of the few nurses of color in the space, one, it took a while for me to move into that space. And being one of the few nurses of color within my discipline, it can be, at times, it can be pretty isolating. It can feel lonely at times and can be exhausting. Being one of few nurses that are down there of color. At the same time, it can feel rewarding as being one of the few nurses that are down there. But at the same time, you do want to see more representation within your field and do question why are there so few numbers of people when you look around that do look like you, and want to know why is that the case. And like I said, you can feel isolated when that happens, and you want to see more representation, and statistically, you know that is better outcome for your patients because of the demographics that it represents. So at the same time, you would like to see more mentorship, you want to see more programs developed. And again, like I said, it did take a while for me to be able to transition into that role. And I'm not sure why that is the case, why the numbers are what they are. So I would like to definitely see more numbers increase in specialty areas, intensive care, ICUs, where they need to be, because representation is definitely needed to improve patient outcomes.
What's your specialty area?
Emergency department.
Thank you. How about you, Charlene? Same question for you.
So yes, I work in the emergency department as well. And through research, we have identified that critical care nursing is not for the Black nurse, quote unquote, or for people of color, because we're not seen as being smart enough to be up to the caliber of someone that is non-Black or, white people. So for me, transitioning within my field, I felt like I'm very invisible. There's people that can't see me even though I look different. So it's kind of a weird complex. So for me transitioning to even to be in charge or to be in triage, I had to advocate for myself, as my other coworkers were able to, that were non-Black or not of color, were able to transition pretty smoothly, where people were advocating for them, saying that I think they're ready to transition. I think they're ready to be a charge nurse, or they're ready to be a triage nurse. Although I have been in my position for 11 years and the people that were in this position were not there as long as I've been. So I want to know why wasn't it my time to transition? And when I reached out, there was no rationale as to why, who moves to where. The identification and the emergency department, if you had to be a nurse at your specific facility for 2 years before transitioning to triage, and that was not my case. So once I advocate for myself, now I am a part of the triage, and now I am a part of the charge nursing, but I was told that I was overlooked. And I am one of 6 Black nurses in the emergency department. How can I be overlooked?
Thank you. How about you, Shannon?
I kind of got lost track here. This is a good conversation. Being the only one. So at the beginning of my career, I was one of very few, just as Candace stated. And I recently challenged management to look at the demographics of the staff that they employed, and recognize that there wasn't any one but like 3 people. And I allowed her to recognize that the Black nurses that did end up coming to her floor came by way of psych. Because as Joanne stated, we're only good enough for certain things in certain disciplines. I have since moved on by using my resources to get into critical care, which is what I've always wanted to do. And as to echo what Charlene said as well, we're not good enough, we're not smart enough. It's not something that we can do. I was given the opportunity, I became the token Black nurse. And I was given the opportunity to step into different disciplines while at my previous institution. I was able to go to almost every unit in that hospital, but it's not something that's common. It's nothing that is accepted. And I challenge any leadership to recognize your demographics on your floor and your unit, and as to why they look the way they do.
Thank you. How about you, Judith?
I remember being the only one, and it's very anxiety-provoking situation. I have to prove myself, and I have to work hard to belong. I have to center myself. I have to be aware not to be in conflict with nobody, staff, management, patients, family, because I will be chastised much harder than the other nurse. I find myself passing my ideas so it can be heard because nobody will hear me. And the worst thing, as Shannon said, you are the only one, you are not
I'm
saying.
sorry, Judy, can you lean into your computer a little bit? Because there's a lot of feedback and I think you're making really good points, but we can't really understand what you're saying. So why don't you try it that way?
Better now?
Yes.
Okay. So I said that I have to pass my opinion to someone else to voice it for me because I don't have a voice. Nobody will take me seriously. And as someone said, you are not many or you are the only one, but you are invisible. But I also find that I am invisible, but my flaws, my weakness, they are amplified and everybody here will see them. So that's a tough situation to do. And we are working to not be the only one, by really encouraging people to go to school, to become nurses, so I am not alone. Somebody else doesn't have to have this experience.
Thank you, Judy. I just want to sort of amplify something that you just said, because I think it was lost in the scratchiness of your sound for some reason. So there's something that you just said that I think needs to be clarified. What you said was your skills and the gifts and your opinions, when those are voiced, you become invisible and are lost in the conversation. But your flaws and the criticisms about you get amplified in the space. And so that I think is powerful, and I think that really needed to be heard. And so I wanted to repeat that because I heard that in what was said, but I don't want it to be lost in the scratchiness. And I then saw the rest of the panelists shaking their heads and amplifying what you said. So that seems to be a common experience. And I do want to ask, given that this is the experience for, it seems like a shared experience, what would be your request in the space to the employer or to your colleagues? What would be a suggestion from you to those in power to make a difference in your experience? What would be a suggestion of how things could be improved for you through your employer, even in our own association? And so I'll start with Charlene.
For me, definitely some mentorship and get people of color into leadership. And if they need assistance with that, they have nurses on the floor that can help them with the hiring process in the workplace, because the demographics right now at my facility, nurses are 85.4% white. And if the leadership is looking at that and paying attention to the demographics, then they can know how the hiring process works and making the workplace look more like our patients that are Black and brown and speak in second and three languages. So we need to do that for sure in our institution and systemically. That's how we can improve.
Thank you. Candace, how about you?
Yeah, I agree. I believe mentorship is very important. Changing the demographics of what we see right now, it has to change. It has to improve. With that, the demographics that we have right now is just not empowering at all. It's just, I always say, imagine if that demographic was reversed. Imagine if our colleagues came in and it was the opposite. How would they feel? If they came into work and the demographics was opposite, how would that feel? It would be a different feel. It's different. You know what I mean? It's a different feel. If the work environment was different, how would it feel? It's a different feel when you come into work and your demographic is different. Imagine if the people of color were the 80%, and you were different, and you were the 16.4%. Just imagine how you would feel coming to work. So we have to start putting ourselves in the shoes of your colleagues and when you come to work.
Okay.
So you have to start thinking that. So I think if we have mentorship and we have put things in positions so that we can put things in perspective to make things work for leadership, it would help.
Okay. How about you, Shannon?
I just want to echo what Charlene and both Candace said about mentorship. I think that's huge, but I think it starts in nursing school as well. My lived experience is when I, right out of high school, when I went to a four-year university out of New York, they told me that I need to reconsider my career. They didn't think it was for me. And I left, and here I am. But I also think that leadership, human resources, whomever fields these resumes and applications, they need to recognize their racial biases first. I think that's a huge thing in life, just recognizing and being aware and wanting to understand and learn your racial biases. I mean, I think we all have racial biases, whether we're Black or white. You just need to be more conscious and more aware of them.
Thank you. And Judith, in the new location.
I would ask my employee to open a space for the continuation of this sensitive and uncomfortable conversation, but honestly, truthfully, and emphatically as in a community, so we can connect emotionally. Then we will see allies and champions coming forward to help create this change. And to MNA, I would like to say, keep doing what you are doing. This is the beginning, but that will not be the end, because the civil rights movement allied itself with labor union because of union is a central place in workplace democracy and the struggle for social justice. So today, your members, we are here telling you to please keep on doing this job, and we count on you to help make the change.
Thank you, Judith. I want to go back to something Shannon said earlier in terms of sort of recognizing and sort of how you move through the space and who helps you move through the space. When you all were transitioning or trying to get into a space where something that you all have said, many of you have said, you were not traditionally seen as being smart enough to occupy, and so that was hard for you to get in. How did you make that transition? What were the key things that allowed you to get past the barriers that were in place that were not allowing you to transition into that space? So I'll start with Shannon.
I think networking was very important. I think the M&A was very important in order for me to network and meet people. I want to give kudos to Joanne, and she knows why. But it was hard to transition, from a lived experience. Quick story, I applied for a job at a trauma center in the city. And at that point, I was about 3.5 years into my career with critical care experience. And I was told I didn't have enough experience, but they hired my white counterpart who I was also working with, who had 10 months experience only in one discipline, which was not critical care. So I think it's just important to network with even different organizations, network with people that you know. I think that's a huge in getting to where you want to be in this career if you are not white, unfortunately.
Thank you. How about you, Charlene?
I really think that networking is very, very important as well. As Shannon had mentioned, I actually knew my manager because I was working in the emergency department first as a secretary. So I kind of just like worked my way up to become a nurse at that time too. But as in for positions and trying to filter in, I recently became a nurse practitioner. So in order to get the rest of the education, now I'm just looking at myself. I'm like, you have to promote yourself. You can't wait for them to promote you. So that's why I always advocate for myself to see where I need to go and what steps I need to take to get there. But if you don't have a mentor to tell you where to go, then that sometimes get lost. And sometimes us as a people too, we get to a point where we're going all the way up a ladder, but we don't know how to come back down to the ladder and help the next person to get to where they need to go. And that's my goal as a person. I always been that person to advocate for others that are surrounding me. And I'm like, hey, sis, I know where I'm at and I know where you need to go to get to where you want to go and where you want to be. And I want to still stay at my facility, but unfortunately they don't hire nurse practitioners. So that's another thing that I'm going to be advocating for in emergency medicine, that nurse practitioners and nurses are a vital source and a vital part of the team. We are part of the team. May I say that again? We are part of the team. So it's always that little gesture that you have to do, but always advocating, networking, and mentorship. And thanks, Joanne, for also being a great mentor and a help to all of us.
Thank you. Candace, how about you?
I was just persistent, and that's how I obtained my position. I just was an advocate for myself, and I just pretty much was persistent in getting my current position. Pretty much, it was a while ago, so I just pretty much stalked my nurse manager. So that's pretty much how I obtained my position. I pretty much stalked him.
Okay. Persistent.
And
Yeah.
to the point, I pretty much just stalked him.
How
I
about
was
you?
just persistent, advocated for myself.
Perfect. How about you, Judith?
Once I was approached by a higher manager, and she saw something in me and she encouraged me to step higher. But to tell you the truth, at that time, the mindset, I didn't have it. And thinking of how my peers will react to me as their manager. So I did not take that step. People say that's weakness. Why not? You are asking, but when you're offered, but there is also how my sisters, my white sisters and brothers, how they would accept me as their nurse manager. So I did not take it. But someone, she saw something in me. And sometimes that's all you need. One person that say, hey, come along. I'll give you the support and so you can move up.
That's great. And so before we wrap up, in terms of the experience of being a nurse of color in Massachusetts in the healthcare system, one of the conversations that we've had in the past and one of the conversations that we've heard in other areas is the patient's response to you and what that means, what that experience is if a patient is rejecting you in that space. What does that support look like? What would you want to hear in that institution, and have you experience that so that you can sort of pass that on so people can understand what that experience is? Because truthfully, if you're a white nurse, there's not likely an experience that somebody's going to tell you they don't want you to be their nurse because you don't look like them. But it seems to be a common theme. And so just in terms of being able to share that, what that sounds like, what that feels like, and how do you navigate that moment? And so I'll start with Candace.
Well, I've had various experiences. I've had various, well, I've not received a lot of support. I tend to handle them pretty much alone in the room. I've been adept in handling them in the room. Many of my colleagues don't know that I am handling them in the room many of times by myself until they spill out into the hallway and they become loud. And then my colleagues tend to then know that there is a problem in the room. But many times I am handling them at the bedside. I never know what's going to happen and how they're going to be handled. There was a very big one that happened where one of my colleagues did support me, where I did feel alone, and she did come to my aid. But sometimes I don't know how it's going to be handled. And that is, that's something that I carry. I'm not sure how everyone else feels, but I'm not sure how it's going to be handled sometimes, to be honest with you. But like I said, I am diffusing them a lot of the times in the room myself. And that's not something that I feel in 2020 I should be going to work carrying that. But there have been occasions where I have had a coworker that has come to my defense and handled it and stepped in and diffused the situation for me. And I was very, very grateful for her for doing that. And we need more allyship with that and not leave nurses of color to diffuse these situations on the unit alone.
Thank you. How about you, Charlene?
Well, Joanne, you done hit something on the nail again. For patients, for me, honestly, I've had a patient and I've been in a room before, and just like Candace, you know, you have to diffuse the situation yourself. My patient had asked me, she was like, what are you about to do? I said, I want to place an IV, draw some blood work, you know, and get you started and have your labs cooking. And she's like, oh, okay. And then she looked at me again and she was like, is there like a white nurse out there that can place this IV for me? I said, no, why? What do you need a white nurse to place an IV? You know, more educated, more educated. I said, you know what? We're fresh out of white nurses today, even though we have several of them on the floor. And I said, I'm more than capable to place your IV. So that's something that you have to handle, right? You're inside of a room. You always have to take care of these patients regardless of how they talk to you. And I think that becomes really hard, especially when you don't have someone to have your back. So when you're in emergency medicine as well, and if they start to say stuff that are, you know, inappropriate or using language that is not appropriate, as in the N word, and they do not get kicked out. And these people are alert and oriented times 7. So that's our new jurisdiction. They're alert enough to make their own decisions. The only time people are not alert enough, we take care of those patients. But if they know what they're doing or what they're saying, and that doctor or that physician or that nurse is not there to back you up and say, it's okay, you can still take care of them, you still can give them their medication, I don't think that's right either. Because, the nurse is also feeling some type of way as well. And it needs to be handled there because we have that systemic racism and it becomes a normalcy. It's not right. So you have to advocate. You have to tell these people, like, we do not tolerate that here in this department. And if you need to get care elsewhere, we're willing to help you and transfer you, because they should not be treating anybody else differently. But I did have one physician, I will say, who had my back, and he did speak up, and he did end up discharging the patient after we took care of the patient, but he ended up discharging the patient and switched nurses. So that way that, I wasn't feeling any type of way on that behalf. But yes, it does happen, and it's unfortunate in 2020.
Okay. And alert for time crunch, but Shannon?
I'll quickly say, I'll echo with both Charlene and Candace are saying. It happens too frequently. One thing that a friend always says to me is, I don't come to work to be disrespected. I come to work to take care of my patients, and that's it. I do feel like it's a feeling of, I do feel like I am in the moment being supported, but is it a genuine support? Is my question, because in one breath you're saying we're not going to tolerate it, and then in the next breath you're making some really shady comments. So how do I know if it's a genuine, yes, I support you and you shouldn't have to deal with that?
Thank you.
And I firmly deal with my patients as well.
Thank you. Judy, do you have anything to add for this?
Yes, I have a story. I got to work my patient. I work on a psych unit, and that patient started from 7:30 calling me names, the N-word, the Africa, the like animal sounds, something about watermelon, and degrading, disrespectful, painful, but I don't let it get to me. But that day after 3 o'clock, it got to me, and they were looking for another nurse, and I volunteered to stay. And passing the info to the incoming nurses, I told them, guys, I will stay, but please, I'll keep my assignment. Take this patient away from me, because today I can't take it anymore. I can't, and you know me, it doesn't get to me, but today it is getting to me, please. And my coworker is like, what's up with you today? You know, that's the way she talks. You know her, how long? 10 years, 12 years? What's up with you today? And I started my second shift. 2 hours later, nurse manager came on board looking for Judith. And she said, I received a phone call that you refused your assignment this afternoon. And I explained to her, and my luck, she was a young Black nurse. She understood me and said, case closed. But I got it from the patient. That patient was loud. The whole unit heard her. And when you're talking like that, you are not talking about me only, the whole, Black staff. But management didn't do nothing. Leadership doesn't say anything about it. And my coworkers trivialize it, make it like it's nothing. You got it every day. Why today you're not upset? So 3 slides, nobody did something. And, we can't trivialize it. And especially when I said, today I can't. And most of the time I can. But I don't have the right to say enough is enough. I can't deal with the racism, the name calling. I could not. So we can do better. We should do better.
Thank you so much. I just really want to thank you all for making yourself so vulnerable, because these were hard questions and it's really hard to put yourself out there. And for those of us who are joining us on it, the reason why that we did not name the hospitals that our panelists are working on, because they were very conscious that this is not endemic to any specific hospital. This is a systemic issue. And so the issues and the experiences need to be addressed generically. But I really do want to thank you all so much for making yourselves vulnerable. And thank you for the suggestions out to our association and to your employers, and the need for good mentorship and providing spaces of networking, but helping us to fully understand more the need to be more sensitive to some of the things that may not be witnessed or felt innately for others. So thank you very, very much for coming forward and being willing to share your experiences. And so this will end this panel and we'll turn it over.
Thank you.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I would like to say welcome to our second panel discussion of the day. My name is Marie Rattacco, and I am a registered nurse at St. Vincent Hospital in Worcester, as well as the Vice President of the Massachusetts Nurses Association. Before I introduce our next group of panelists, I want to say thank you to the nurses who joined us for panel 1. Hearing your firsthand stories and perspectives on this important topic was invaluable, and your work and words will help to pave the way in our fight for safe, fair, and equitable workplaces, as well as in our fight for a safe, fair, and equitable society. So again, thank you. Our second panel of the day is entitled Our Charge, Framing the Work Through the Lens of Ethics. And we have 4 brave and exceptional nurses taking part today. Our first panelist is Claudine Brough-Lopes. Claudine holds a Bachelor of Science degree in nursing from Labouré College. She is a founder of Black Nurses Rock New England, whose mission is to mentor minority professionals who are entering the healthcare profession. As president of Black Nurses Rock New England, she collaborates with other organizations and businesses in the community to secure scholarships for minority students. In her volunteerism, she is committed to ending disparities in healthcare that affect minorities. Over the years, she has coordinated healthcare screenings in partnership with the American Heart Association, provided support to countries devastated by hurricanes, and participated in mission support to serve the children of Barbados. She is the recipient of several awards that highlight her commitment to her community, including the Excellence in Nursing Award from the New England Regional Black Nurses Association, which she received in 2017. Next, Samantha Joseph Erskine, holds a Bachelor of Science degree in nursing from Kaplan University, an associate's degree in healthcare administration from the University of Phoenix, and certificates in nursing and midwifery from Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, St. Lucia. She serves as co-chair of the Diversity Committee of the Massachusetts Nurses Association and is also the co-chair of the Black Lives Matter Coalition's Subcommittee on Diversity and Inclusion. She recently received the Image of the Professional Nurse Award for her contributions to the Black Lives Matters movement from the Massachusetts Nurses Association. Next, Sarah Maroney holds numerous degrees, including a Master of Science degree in Community Health Nursing from Boston University's Graduate School of Nursing, and a Master's of Theological Studies degree with a concentration in ethics from the Harvard Divinity School. For the past 30 years, Sarah has taught classes to nurses on topics such as the legal and ethical issues in oncology nursing practice, ethics and substance abuse, and ethical dilemmas for nurses at the bedside. She also serves as the director of the M&A's Center for Ethics and Human Rights. Next, Victoria Pike holds a Bachelor of Science degree in nursing from the Divine Word University of Baclaban, Philippines, a Master of Science in Training and Development from Wesley University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and a Master of Science degree in nursing from Xavier University in Nashua, New Hampshire. Her experience and skills include work as a senior diversity trainer, bedside staff nursing for 40 years in various clinical settings, including emergency and medical surgical units, and managerial and administrative experience in clinical settings. She has worked with multicultural patients and colleagues in the United States, as well as in other countries, including the Philippines and Jordan. In addition, Victoria is the current Regional Vice President of the Philippine Nurses Association of America. Also joining us is Dr. Joanne Fergus, who will be moderating this panel. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Dr. Fergus, I will turn things over to you now.
Thanks, Marie. So you all were present to hear Dr. Dyson on our first panel, and this panel we're looking and stepping back a little further, looking at the concept of racism and its effect on our healthcare system from a broader standpoint. And so this week we had the Attorney General of Massachusetts release a report titled Building Towards Racial Justice and Equity in Health, a Call to Action. And that report really amplified and echoed the themes of health disparities and the need for racial justice in the healthcare system. In this discussion, I'll direct this question specifically to Sarah. From your expertise as an ethicist, what is the grounding for nurses and healthcare professionals as we consider racism and the consequences of racism on patients and our colleagues through an ethical lens?
Well, I think probably most importantly, we have to understand from the point of view of its moral philosophy, and it looks at the behavior implications of being human. What acts do we perform as human beings that are right-making because they forge moral bonds in communities? And what acts do we perform as humans that are wrong-making because they sever those bonds? So if you keep that in mind and you look at what we've heard today, you can clearly see, as Dr. Dyson was saying, you know, the moral bonds of the community never were completely united. They were broken from the beginning of this country, clearly, especially with slavery. So we have to remedy that, but we have to have instructions on how you do that. And for nurses, fortunately, like all professions, we have a code of ethics that can guide us. And the code is very specific. It especially on the type of thing we're trying to do now. Those nurses who so poignantly presented some of the aloneness they felt, that your code, all nurses, this is a non-binding, every nurse is bound to this code. So this code binds you to certain behaviors, and one of them is to support your colleagues. Obviously, that's not happening, or it's not happening totally in our community. It also, it talks about the first 3 provisions of the code, there are 9, really are patient-oriented. The nurse in a relationship to the patient and her duties to the patient. Then it gets into the nurse herself and the workplace. Then it enlarges into the nursing profession itself and nursing organizations and their relationship with other organizations. So you have a roadmap of how we behave, what our duties are to patients. And of course, I loved the way you talked about being able to meet people face to face who are familiar with your culture and language. This is really absolutely essential if you're going to establish trust relationships with your patient. And the profession itself hasn't looked at this and said, how come we have 98% white people taking care of people of color, people of different cultures, and we don't teach them in nursing school how to take care of those people. I've been a nursing instructor for 10 years. So we have a lot of work to do, but we have the code to instruct us. And it gets into, especially provision 8 and 9, getting into collaborative relationships, working towards social justice. And so if we can use that, but it's no good if we don't use it or we don't implement it. But it's there. It's a roadmap for us to begin.
Thank you, Sarah. For our panelists, we are blessed enough to have panelists representing other organizations doing work in different ways. For our panelists, from your perspective, what is the value of diversity among healthcare providers? And is there any value in having clinicians that reflect the population? We know in Massachusetts, as Sarah's rightly said, we're 90% white, but we're in Boston currently, if not already, a minority majority city, close to that. What, from your perspectives, would be the value of having clinicians represent or more closely represent the populations that they're serving? And I'll start with Claudine.
Good morning. First, I want to say bravo to the panelists, the first panel. You guys were awesome and very passionate about what you're doing. And so bravo to all of you. It is definitely necessary to have diversity providers in leadership positions, policy, at the policy table, you know, at the bedside, because we all heard the saying, if you are not at the table, you're on the table. So it is very important to have diversity providers, leadership in healthcare to make change. And we want to be the change we want to see. So having a diverse population of healthcare workers and leaders helps us better take care of our staff, understand our staff and our patients. So it's very necessary.
Okay. How about you, Victoria?
So for me, as an administrator, I take pride in having a lot of diversity. I applaud the first panelists for being transparent in their feelings, because most of us immigrants have experienced the same experiences like you have, hard to talk experiences. And feelings that are really hurt along the way. And it does not really improve the way we look at things in a perspective that should really be of value. But things are changing, and they're changing, howbeit slowly, very, very slowly. And I am so happy that we can actually talk about it now, and we are actually empowered to be at the table. And I always use this opportunity, being a diverse person, senior diversity training for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, to impress on our white brothers and sisters that there is a different perspective from people from different colors and from all colors, actually. And we should value the contributions that we immigrants bring to this country as a United States of, according to Dr. Tyson, amnesia. But we have to actually advocate for ourselves, be mentors ourselves to the next generation, and obviously be the leader that everybody looks up to, so that they have the access to somebody like you. Whether they are white, black, brown, and whatever, make it accessible for them to approach you, so that you can actually be the impetus for them to even raise up these kinds of issues.
Thank you. Samantha?
Hi, thanks everybody for being here today. And the first panel, you guys, amazing. And I could echo a lot of your experiences when it comes to being a Black person or person of color in a predominantly white profession, and the effects that it have on us both professionally and personally. In regards to having a diverse group of diversity in the workforce, it's not only to what it does to us as nurses, but to our patients. The level of trust and the level of belief that our patients have in us has changed over the years. It is so refreshing when I walk into a room and I meet somebody from a Caribbean island, a patient from a Caribbean island, and I could explain to them what is happening with them at this time, and also, because of our cultural differences, explain to the providers in that workplace what pain means to a person of color from this island or from that island. And one of my experiences was this elderly lady who was from Haiti. There was actually nobody in our ER who could speak to her because she did not speak a word of English. All she spoke was Haitian Creole. I am not fluent in Haitian Creole, but we speak Creole where I'm coming from. But there was some understanding, and she appreciated it. And then we were able to understand why she was here and what was going with her. And she felt much more comfortable. She felt much more at ease that whatever care that we were providing was based on her complaints and her needs, not what we all learned from the textbooks, because each individual should be treated differently, even if our symptoms and our problems are the same. But we all, as our cultural, our individuality, our care must reflect that. So having diversity not only helps us as individual nurses, but like I said, our patients, on the part of having diversity for professionals, it is very difficult to work in an area where nobody understands what you're saying, or nobody understands if you make a comment that nobody understands what does that mean, and take it out of context. And not having that kind of support or that clique or that group that you could relate to when you face some form of racial slurs or some experience that you've never experienced because of where you're coming from. The number of nights I've gone home to cry because nobody understood what it meant to me that I was being treated differently because I look different. So if we have more people, more professionals of different backgrounds or different culture in the workforce, that would be taken care of, at least to a certain point.
Thank you. I think there's something that you said that struck that I'd like to unpack a little bit more. It's not just how the nurse feels or how the healthcare provider feels, the importance of it to patients. So when we talk about, again, referring back to the Attorney General's report, highlighting issues of racial justice and health disparities, when you talk about diversity among providers, what specifics with respect, or an example with respect to a patient experience, how does that translate, as you said, Samantha, but I'm thinking in the various places where you all work. For instance, Claudine works in a different place from Victoria. How does that experience translate in terms of the ethics of being able to relay a diverse perspective in the workplace, or bring some insight to a colleague that may not have understood a patient being non-compliant from their perspective, may simply be them not understanding what you're trying to translate to them because you're not speaking in terms of their culture. Claudine, do you have any insight on that?
Diversity in healthcare, again, is necessary, and it leads to culture competency, right? We learned that in nursing school. It offers, services to unique social social and uniqueness to each patient. We're talking a lot about the Black and the white, and immigrants and not immigrants, but there's so many more things in the mixture, in the bowl. Like, I'm learning for myself my own biases, and I'm learning more about the Vietnamese culture and their nonverbal cues and things like that. So having diversity in healthcare in the providers gives a uniqueness to each patient that is important. Around diet, around exercise, what's important to them. Like, we educate our patients on diabetes, but understanding their culture and what they eat for breakfast and what they eat for dinner helps educate them on how to eat better or healthier, make healthier choices. We educate our patients, again, like on healthy choices, but if what they're thinking about is the utility bill, the gas, the oil, the rent, they're not going to embrace what we're teaching them about the diet. So we have to understand the social part of our patients and the struggles that they're going through in order to reach them. And that's why I chose community health nursing, because I like to treat the patients, the entire family, and the patient as a whole. I hope I answered that for you.
That was helpful, because I think we say a lot of things in abstract, that it's good, but in a real life scenario, we know from your personal experience that you're saying it's good for the nurse, it's good for the provider, but the concrete effect, the sort of trickle down effect on the patient, who is the primary reason why we're in the environment in the first place, what does that mean and what does that signify for the community? So Victoria, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, I have a personal experience where a patient actually refused to be given medication by a nurse of color. And how did I, as an administrator, actually deal with that? Because the patient a white patient would not accept medication or an IV being started. And it was very critical for him to have the IV started before even the blood transfusion. And how I navigated that was when I started talking about the nurse being a culturally competent nurse, knows the culture of not only her own culture, but the culture of other people and the culture of America. And the patient who was white actually seemed to have captured the trust that we as immigrants of color, as well as the white American nurses that we are being compared to, as just as bright and as just as intelligent. When I started holding her hand and I said, I could start your IV with one prick, and it would just be actually the right stuff that would correct these kinds of misconceptions, even on our patients. And I think we as leaders should be there and be actually not be afraid to show our competence, and we should confidently go. And it's not just proving to our patient, but it is also elevating the standards of care that we can give to the patient. Because what eventually happened was that the patients obviously cared, transitioning for him to have a blood transfusion so that he doesn't go down and really be truly anemic and then have extra more transfusions, was critical to the summation of all his medical care and the transition for him to be really discharged in a matter of 3 days. So if I had not intervened, even as an immigrant, because the patient did not really like the nurse that was taking care of him, who was a person of color, what would have happened to my patient was my first question. How would it impact the impressions of that patient when he goes back to the community? And what if the patient die? What kind of moral backbone could I actually show my other nurses and to myself as a nurse who has been trained and highly trained actually to insert IVs? We know that we actually in our programs have been trained a lot more to do many procedures that are not even open here in the United States unless you are a nurse practitioner or something. So I think that bringing that to the forefront and also mentoring the nurse that was actually rejected and telling the nurse not to be offended by it, but to try again the next time and call me to be at her side would be really tantamounting to good quality care, good interpersonal relationship, and overall an outstanding outcome for healthcare.
Thank you. Sarah, I would like if you could frame that in sort of the frame of ethics, the value of diversity and the value, the expectation around the care of the patient, the care of the practitioner, given the fact that a few of the panel, including the first panelist, talked about patients rejecting their care. What is the sort of ethical approach to that? Because we have a duty to not do harm to the patient by making them anxious, but we also have a responsibility to the clinician in that space as well. What kind of insight would you have for us to be able to consider that?
Well, I was quite struck by those stories, and I really think that what I was struck by is that there wasn't some institutional policy that patients receive on admission, that we have a diverse, competent, highly educated workforce, nursing staff, and your expert, there's a patient bill of rights, as you probably are all aware of, because it's usually posted by the elevator in a hospital building. But the institution, this is something that's larger than individual encounters. Yeah. For instance, one time I remember I was working in a large hospital. It was a Sunday morning and it was quiet, excuse me. And there was a woman I was taking care of. She was from the South, and it was the day of the Kentucky Derby. And she was a part owner of one of the horses that was going to be run in the Derby, and she was all excited, and she had the TV on talking about it and everything. And the lab technician came in to take blood, and he was colored, and she refused to let him take blood. And so I spoke right up, and I said, oh, you don't have that option in this hospital. I said, everyone has to receive the competent caretakers we have. That's how it works here. You're in the North. But she said to me, well, I absolutely refuse. So I said, would you like me to call your physician? And she said, absolutely. So I did. Of course, he came up and he read her the riot act. He said, you're more than willing to leave the hospital immediately. But as long as you stay here, you have to accept all the providers that we consider appropriate for your care.
It's powerful support.
But this is what institutions should be doing. I mean, I find it hard to believe that when a patient, you know, when you become a patient, they have all this paper they give you, and here are your rights, and here, you know, here are your options, et cetera. That should be in there. That you receive, we have competent caretakers here, and we expect you to respect them and to accept them.
In that vein of the conversation, our profession of nursing is framed as a caring profession. And so we wrap ourselves in the Johnson & Johnson commercials with the soft, fuzzy backgrounds of caring and nurturing. How do we then explain the persistence of bias and racism? Because we understand that we have the image of who we are, but we are people in our skins, and we are the sum part of all of our experiences. How do we explain, as the Attorney General's report highlights, the persistence of health disparities, but the experience of being othered or feeling outside or not seen by professionals of color in the profession, in a profession that is cloaked in, you know, caring as the mantle?
Well, you know, it's very interesting. Nursing has what they call a social policy statement. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but it's sort of a companion to your nursing code of ethics. But in the social policy statement, they give the history of nursing, first of all, but they talk about a social contract. And we talk about a social contract. When we declare ourselves professional, we are saying to society, if you award us professional status, we in turn will do the following things. We will take care of you. We will act in your best interest. If you're awarded professional status, you're self-regulating. You have your discrete body of knowledge, and you have a code of ethics that guides you in your practice. Those are all, this is true for any profession. So nursing is part of that. But if you look at social contracts and where they came from, they came, you know, first from the Enlightenment period in Europe, then they came to Thomas Jefferson, et cetera, in the Declaration of Independence. But it was always exclusionary. There were some people included in the contract and some people who were excluded. And that framework is existent today. That's where systemic racism comes from. And it's still there. And if you look at nursing, nursing needs to look at themselves. We all need to own this individually, but also collectively. Every one of us needs to own it. As a nurse said, I didn't understand the Vietnamese. Now I have to learn, you know, I've learned a lot about her culture that I didn't know. So we all have a duty, which is, you know, certainly an ethical term. We all have a duty to open ourselves up and start learning and changing. Not changing ourselves only, we have to change the profession. We have to change the whole way we present ourselves and what we care about. So that, I mean, it's so important that we understand how this came to be in the first place. I mean, you're not even aware of it.
I'm struck by what you said in terms of the exclusionary nature of the social contract.
Yeah.
Not everybody was engaged and involved. And so that speaks to part of the history of nursing as a whole, because at the inception of nursing, not everybody was included. And in fact, people of color were explicitly excluded from being able to be included in the ranks. What does that mean then for who it was allowed to be in and how that was perpetuated through the system? I'm gonna
understand your question.
Yeah, so part of what you said, it was an exclusionary status, right? And so if not everybody was included in, it speaks to your point of who got to train the trainer, and it speaks to the point of some of what the other panelists said. If not everybody was invited in the first place, and everybody looked like, you know, white nurses who were allowed to be nurses and allowed to be leaders.
Before we get to that, it was white men only.
It's true.
Remember that? And we were part of a hidden profession, you know, women, caring. That was done in the home, nurturing.
Yeah.
I mean, those are all the hidden professions.
Yeah.
And then you had the public professions, you know, the guys out there, you know, the lawyers and the doctors and the politicians and the, you know. So it was you know, we were hidden for a long time. So we have a double whammy. Yeah. We were predominantly female, and we had the legacy of exclusion.
I would ask though for Claudine and Victoria, as leaders in associations that were created in order to support nurses of color, why do you feel the importance of those associations, and understanding that those associations actually came into being because nurses of color were excluded from joining predominantly white nursing associations, or excluded from joining nursing associations at all? What is the value from your perspective as leaders and creators, actually, in your case, Claudine, founders, of having associations that cater to and support nurses of color?
For me, so Black Nurses Rock is dear to my heart. And the reason being is because I'm Black and I'm a woman. And when I went through nursing school, there was a handful of us, like 5 of us in the nursing program. And of course, like 3 at the end, right? So going through nursing school and being told that, well, maybe nursing is not the profession for you. And then in the workplace, having to work 10 times harder. Your scrubs have to be crisp. Your hair has to be up a certain way. Your nails have to look a certain way. Just to be recognized for what? Your work. And like you said, it's like who's training the trainer?
Right.
There are many nursing organizations out there. But for me, it's important to have, and Black Nurses Rock is diverse, and we welcome all. But it's important to have a Black nursing organization that believed in the community, that wanted to uplift other nurses, and advocate for our patients, and go into the community to serve. We are definitely a boots on the ground organization. And I take pride in mentoring and listening to nursing students and just supporting them on their path, because nursing school, regardless of what color you are, is difficult. But then when you put the color on it, right, it is 10 times difficult. And being Black in a nursing school, and being the only Black on the unit professional, because you have housekeeping, people of color, right? But most of the time, yeah, the only Black nurse there. And it's a lonely place to be. I felt it, I've lived it, and that's not what I want for our upcoming nurses. So that's why it's important to have Black Nurses Rock organization to support, to let them know that they're not alone, and to, actually fill them with confidence to be leaders, of tomorrow. Because if we're not leaders, again, if we're not at the table, we're on the table.
So we could carry this on forever, but I want to make sure to get, because we're running out to the end of the time for this panel. I do want to ask all of you if you could stop and think about what advice or what recommendations you all have for our association and for your employers about building more inclusive anti-racist workplaces and associations. How do we bring people into conversations in such a way that we invite them into the space and include them in the conversation without making them feel blamed and making them feel the need to sort of shun the conversation? I would start with Samantha. What recommendations would you have for an association or an employer for creating spaces that are inclusive?
Well, when I remember the day I was asked to run for position on the board of directors of the MNA, I was taken by surprise, and I was quite hesitant to do it, very hesitant to do it, didn't want to do it. And that very first meeting I walked in and I sat there, I listened and tried to learn because it was new to me and everything. And then I went home and I'm like, told my husband, I looked at him and I was like, babes, guess what? He's like, what? I said, I'm the token Black girl. And he looked at me and as sternly as he could, he said, you could be the token Black girl or you could let your voice be heard. And took his advice, and here I am today sitting on a panel with the MNA, you know, discussing racism and finding ways we could include people of color. And it's one of those things that we can do is open the door for us. Let us know that we are wanted, that we are invited, we are welcomed. And I will say, from being part of the MNA and being on the board of directors, I have been welcomed by all and my skin color did not matter at that time. I felt part of the group. My voice, what I had to say mattered. And that's all we're asking, is to open that door for us and invite us in. And even as our workplace, let your nurses know that you're not alone. You have people, you can move forward. You could be in that position. Have the dialogue, have the conversation with us. Because like the last panelist said, racism and talking about racism is a very uncomfortable position. And it's happening right now. It's happening at the hospital where I work, where I also serve on their BLM coalition. And you know, they're listening to us now, and that's what we do. We just want this door to open to us and let us come in and listen to us, let us be heard and take our advice. And we're not just being angry, or we don't want to be aggressive in what we want to say, but because of our emotions of segregation and discrimination, we are angry. So when we do speak, sometimes our emotions take over, and the anger comes out and the pain comes out. So we appear as being, and that is being labeled as that angry Black person. So
Samantha, I don't want to cut you off because we only have 4 minutes before we have
sorry.
to wrap this.
Go ahead,
I want to give Victoria and Claudine and Sarah a quick 1 minute, sort of what's your recommendation for how do we move forward? So I'll go to Victoria next.
So as the regional vice president for the Filipino Nurses Association, I actually am great in advocating for my own Filipino nurses, but as well as also people of other color. It's open to all communities. But the best thing actually that organizations like us that we can do is actually stand up for each other and be allies and collaborate with other organizations so that we stand strong in terms of appearing culturally competent. Not only that, but also just as smart as anyone else in the hospital or in the community. The other two, I have two passions. One is that community service. We have, as people of color, to be visible in the community, because if we deliver, care into the community. I volunteer every Tuesday at the Pine Street Inn home in Boston or in Shattuck, and has found a lot of conversations that had spurred actually the appreciation for the colored girls coming to organizations like that are actually disenfranchised, and a lot of them have been co-workers, workers like us before. And what impact can you bring is a lot of impact, and then carry that on to the rest of your hospital. In terms of your hospital, when there is a need, be the first to actually celebrate, and be the first actually to volunteer. Thank you.
Thank you. Claudine?
First, I would say it starts with us in educating ourselves and being disruptors. Samantha, so respectfully, she says, we want to be invited in. We no longer want to be invited in. We want to shake things up and say, this is not right. We want to, be disruptors. That's one. And two, every organization should truly have a clear cultural competency every year. We talk about, domestic violence and things like that in the workplace. Well, racism in the health in an organization is kind of domestic violence, right? So there should be annual cultural competency when you come in, when you're leaving, all around, and that's it. I talk a lot.
Thank you. Sarah, do you have one minute if you have anything to offer?
Yeah, I think we have to start with education and socialization of our nurses in nursing school, and they don't understand this. It isn't taught. And then we have to talk to each other. Organizations you're all wonderful. They need to talk to each other so that we're one cohesive whole going together. We need to own this, but we need to own it together, not separately, or we'll never get where we need to go.
Thank you all so much for this rich conversation, and we're hoping that this is the first of many, many, many conversations to come. So I'll turn it over to Samantha for the wrap up of our program.
Hi, everyone. I'm here again. Before we transition to the wrap-up conversation, I want to acknowledge and thank all of today's participants. Claudine Noakes, President and co-founder of the Black Nurses Rock, Victoria Pike, Vice President of the Filipino Nurses Association, and Sarah Maroonick, Chair of the MNA's Center for Ethics. Many thanks. Sorry. Many thanks as well to other brave MNA member panelists, Candice Jones, Charlene Hollins, Judith Laguerre, and Shannon Niles. You all were so generous in sharing your stories and experiences. And of course, a special thank you to Dr. Dyson for setting the tone for this moment of education and revelation. While this is the end of this educational offering, it isn't just the first offering in what the MNA's commitment to ongoing dialogues and activities related to anti-racism and social justice. This is part of the MNA's deeper commitment to being an agent of change in improving the lived experience of our members and the members of our community. We encourage you to join us on our journey in learning how we can all work together to bring meaningful change to our communities and our places of work. We do not want to end today with all questions but no answers. To that end, we suggest the following steps that you can take to become engaged. We understand that we may all be at different stages of this journey, but we are all able to do something. What can I do? Possible action steps. Educate myself on the issue of racism and bias. Ask my employer to develop action plans for addressing racism and bias at work. Ask my employer to address issues of disparities in patient care. Join a working committee at my employer. Join a working committee in my union or association. MNA members can join the MNA's Diversity Committee by visiting the website. Speak out when I witness incidents of racism or prejudice, and considering completing the Harvard Implicit Association test. The MNA's Diversity Committee has gathered an extensive list of references and resources that can help us in this journey. A link to this resource list will be included in the follow-up email we will soon be sending to you, but is also highlighted on the screen now. Thank you again, and we look forward to expanding our work with your support and together.